This is TWiT.
I'm not sure if a lot of people actually understood what Windows 10s is, but Windows 10s is no longer, at least no longer, a standalone product. Now, those who have been following this understand that this was a move that Microsoft was making to compete with Apple and Google. They wanted to make the Windows S mode. It was going to be a more controlled, more tablet-like, more professional experience for people who are used to the sort of BYOD environment. Now, the downside to this was that it was only going to be free for Microsoft Service customers, and everyone else was going to fork over $50. Not so great. And especially when you consider that the people who got early copies of Windows S were complaining that really all it does is limit you. You could only install apps from the Google Store. You could only install apps that had been vetted by Microsoft. And that app ecosystem was sorely, sorely, sorely missing. People were saying that Microsoft was trying to duplicate what Apple and Google had with their iPad and their tablet, but they just were making no one happy. People who wanted tablets would find their system a bit too complicated, and people who wanted a Windows PC would find their system too limited. Now, OEMs will theoretically be able to choose whether or not to ship their PCs with S mode on or off, which opens a possibility that you might have to pay up to disable S mode, which is fun on its own. Now, in the same way that you would have to pay $49 to go from Windows 10s to Windows 10 Pro today. Chee, I want to throw this over to you. S mode has been, I don't know, it's been something between hope for the future that maybe Microsoft has a mobile device plan to ridiculed. Where did you fall?
Okay, I'm actually trying to put this into perspective. The Google Chromebook and iPads are absolutely taking over the K through 12 market. And it's all coming down to support costs. When you can have any Tom, Dick, or Harry, install anything you want, you start getting some really interesting support issues on malware, viruses, all kinds of stuff. But when you have applications that can only come from the Microsoft App Store, that support cost goes way, way, way down, which is why Chromebooks are so popular now for K through 12. What Windows 10s does is it's Windows RT. I have an original Surface RT, and that has never slowed down. It has always been consistent because I can only have vetted applications installed on it. I actually gave one of them to one of my nephews, and they're still using it. And it's great for them. He actually likes it better than the Chromebook. So if Windows 10s is really just like an Intel version of Windows RT, they might have something, but for the K through 12 arena.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people who are watching this, they were afraid of that, because let's go back 2 decades and remember why Apple came roaring back. Apple they were less than a footnote. At one point, we remember that there was a very high-profile executive who he said, I think the best bet for Apple is to buy back all their stock and then give the money away. They were laughed at. But then they came roaring back because not only did they make good products, but they seeded those products into the educational market. They got them into schools, into high schools, and into universities, and those people grew up, and that's what they bought. Microsoft is afraid that Google, actually really Google more than Apple, is doing the same thing right now. They're seeding their devices in all of these schools, and these are the devices people are going to grow up with. These are the devices that they're going to buy. So they're trying to get into the mobility market. But Chee, I get this. I mean, you just explained why this is happening. But does it make sense to you? Because people who are in the enterprise are looking at Windows S and they're saying, it just doesn't work. It's just, no, they're not going to, you're too late. You can't have an alternative that is slightly worse than a Google Chromebook or an Apple tablet and expect people to use it. Is it too late?
Okay, first, after I rant, I'm going to pass it to Curt because he's got a much better view of this stuff. But Microsoft is making a mistake. They're charging a premium for Windows 10s. The reality is they should be making it cheaper to get better adoption. Because in the enterprise, you want more control. You want to be able to have vetted applications. You don't want to drive up your support costs. That's where 10S makes more sense. But you know what? Curt's got a better view. Let's toss it to Curt next. Curt?
Well, it is an interesting thing. And as you say, I think a lot of this goes back to education, but there is still a play in some aspect of the enterprise. And let's be real clear. We're not talking in general about the kind of enterprise user who has executive vice president as part of their title. Those people are always going to get fairly full-featured systems, not necessarily because they really need them, but because the position allows them to have it. Where we're looking for this kind of device is at the vast number of service technicians, field service folks, warehouse people. So blue collar right up to the lower edge of white collar. And what you look at is something where they are using web-fronted enterprise applications where they don't generate or need to store personal information on the enterprise device. And so it's very easy for them to do something that a lot of educational installations are doing. That's having a cart that, say, 100 devices go into at a time. At the end of the workday, just like at the end of the school day, people put their device back in this box, into a slot. It charges the device. They often have things in them that will physically disinfect them, and it will reset them back to the default configuration. So it wipes away any sort of personal data that was on them, wipes away any data of the day, puts it back to only those applications and that data approved by the organization to start the next day. That really is the very basic type of deployment that Apple hit a home run with the iPad, that the Chromebooks have been doing so very, very well in, and now that Microsoft wants a piece of. And that piece is going to come not only in the experience that S offers for the enterprise user, but its compatibility with these existing hardware devices that recharge, disinfect, and reconfigure the systems en masse at the end of every day.
Well, I mean, that was the enterprise sale that Microsoft was trying to pitch S for, which is this idea of you have too many workstations right now that have too many vectors for exploitation. You've got too many people who could, as we covered in the blips, who could click on a link in an email phishing scam and suddenly expose all the hard work that you've done to secure your network. So S, as Curtis, as you said, even if it's not used in an educational environment, does have the ability to offer something that we want, which is make sure that the endpoints don't get compromised, or if they do get compromised, that there's an immediate and automatic way to reverse that compromise. And yet it's still a hard sell. I mean, I remember I've sat in on episodes of Windows Weekly with Paul Thurrott and Mary Jo Foley, and we've gone around and around and around about this. S could be a good idea. I mean, at its core, it's an interesting idea that does offer some benefits, and yet none of us thought that this was something that was going to take with the Windows group. Cheebert, is the Windows group just not going to take this? I mean, it sounds to me that there's actually a cultural problem here. If I'm buying a Windows machine, I expect a certain level of control over that machine. And for you to tell me that, well, it's Windows, but no, it's not going to fly.
You know, I can't, my crystal ball is just as cloudy as yours, but from talk, I did a lot of, classes for the geriatric group. And the reality is our parents, they don't care about a full-featured Windows machine. The kids don't care. They just want to play, like, Amigo Dave says, Pac-Man. The reality is we're not going to have a greater penetration unless we have a less expensive, and I say expensive from a support standpoint, a less expensive solution for the people that aren't interested in learning how to turn on this or that widget. They're not interested in ever knowing that there's a super user mode and things like that. They just want it to work. They want an appliance. I think Windows 10S has potential as an appliance. Just like people are treating Chromebooks, just like people are treating iPads. There's still going to be power users that want the full Windows 10 experience. But I think from, especially K through 12, lower, I hate to say the word lower end workers, but the workers that are task oriented instead of, a sysadmin, 10S makes a lot of sense. So 1, support costs. 2, higher reliability. 3, and we haven't mentioned this yet, 10S, because of the way it's configured, allows you to dramatically stretch out your battery time because it can crank the CPU back. It doesn't need to have performance as the highest priority because it doesn't have to support as much in the way of malware scanners or virus scanners and things like that, or just clean up utilities to figure out what's going on with the misbehaving apps. So you can get that longer battery life. So will it be a hit? Don't know yet.
I think Specs in our chat room actually has a really good point. He says, okay, well, what's the target market? And I think that's so much of this confusion, which is, Cheebert, at the beginning, you made a really good pitch for this being for the educational market, and it made sense. Curtis, you made a good pitch for this being good for organizations, enterprise maybe, and why it's good for administration and good for security. And we can kind of nod our head and say yes, but we still don't actually know what Microsoft intends this to be. And I think that's what makes it so confusing, because in the past when they've done this, like with Bob or with Windows RT, it's always died on the vine. And there's too many developers who have been burned too many times by Microsoft who are going to say, heck no, I'm not going to put my development dollars into this S thing, because why would I do that? Why would I limit the sale of my app to those who are going to agree to use the crippled S when I could develop a regular app that will be on so many more computers? I think until Microsoft figures out that targeting issue, who is this exactly for, they're not going to get the apps in the store to make S work properly. Cheebert, I'm going to ask, actually no, Curtis, I'm going to ask you first. Your crystal ball here. One of the things that we tossed around here at TWiT was this idea of Microsoft needs to make S the free operating system. You just can get it. You can install it with the ability to upgrade. You pay your $49 or your $100 to get to Windows 10 Home. To me, that's a much better starting point than saying, I want you to pay for a crippled OS.
I agree with you there, and I think it does make a lot of sense. And let me tell you where I think it makes the most sense. Microsoft has been moving in a very Google-like direction in terms of the way its personal productivity apps are deployed. In other words, we're seeing them push more and more toward the web-based subscription model, the software as a service model, just like Google has. The Microsoft productivity suite, Office 365, can very easily be used on one of these devices. And for the consumer or for the corporation that has gone in the direction of Office 365, and let's admit it, that means that all of the applications, all of the storage is in the cloud, not on the edge device. Something like this makes a ton of sense. And from that perspective, the only difference between it and the Chromebook and Google environment is some details in the user interface and the name on the product. So where I begin to see the future of this is as the device that is the low-cost entry to the Microsoft cloud ecosystem.
All right, I'm actually with you. Cheebert, what do you think? Is this the low point entry, or is this the super exclusive level that only admins get to access?
I vote low point. I actually didn't mind Windows RT. The Surface RT that I have, I had insane battery life.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
Super light. Yeah, I still use it. It's still a good tablet.
Yeah, I think there is a space for this operating system. I just don't think Microsoft has it yet.